Would you believe me if I told you that a single wedding invitation, or the lack of one, could unravel an entire family? That a decision as small as crossing a name off a guest list could expose years of jealousy, resentment, and secrets no one wanted to admit? It happened to me. My own sister banned me from her wedding. And the reason? She was convinced her fiancé had feelings for me. But what she didn't expect was that this decision would cost her everything, including the wedding itself. I'm Michelle, and this is the story of how I went from being the invisible sibling to the reason my sister's life fell apart. But before you think this is some dramatic love triangle, let me set the record straight. This wasn't about romance. This was about power, control, and what happens when the family scapegoat refuses to play along anymore. Because the truth is, this wedding wasn't just about two people saying, "I do." It was about who had the right to belong. And for my family, that answer had never included me, until someone unexpected decided otherwise. You don't wake up one day and realize you're the outsider in your own family. It happens slowly, over the years, in moments so small they almost seem insignificant, until you look back and see the pattern. For me, that pattern started early. My sister, Jennifer, was always the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one who fit perfectly into the mold our parents expected. I, on the other hand, was different. Not rebellious, not reckless, just unnoticed. While Jennifer was showered with praise for every little achievement, I was left to figure things out on my own. If she won an award, my parents would celebrate. With a fancy dinner, if I accomplished something, a quick, "That's nice," before the conversation moved on. Over time, I stopped expecting recognition. It was just how things were. By the time I was in high school, it was clear that Jennifer and I weren't just two different people. We lived in two different worlds. She was popular, confident, and always in the spotlight. I struggled with social anxiety, often feeling like a stranger in my own home. And instead of support, I got eye rolls and lectures about how I needed to toughen up. The message was clear. Jennifer belonged. I didn't. This favoritism didn't just affect the way we were treated, it shaped how we saw ourselves. Jennifer thrived under constant validation, while I learned to disappear. I stopped trying to connect with my parents. I stopped expecting warmth from my sister. And by the time I left for college, the distance between us wasn't just physical, it was emotional, and it felt permanent. So when I found out my sister was getting married, I wasn't surprised that I wasn't the first to know. I wasn't even surprised when I wasn't invited. What did surprise me? The reason behind it. Because when Jennifer made the decision to ban me from her wedding, she didn't just exclude me from a single day. She confirmed what I had suspected for years. I had never truly been part of their family, but what she didn't expect was that someone else had noticed. And for the first time in my life, someone spoke up. Being the black sheep of the family isn't just about being treated differently. It's about slowly losing your sense of belonging. It's about realizing that no matter how hard you try, you will always be on the outside looking in. For years, I tried to convince myself that it didn't bother me, that it was just how our family worked. But the truth? Being ignored is its own kind of damage. It doesn't leave bruises, but it leaves doubts. About your worth, about your place in the world, about whether you even matter to the people who are supposed to love you the most. Psychologists call this emotional neglect, and its effects run deep. Studies have shown that children who grow up feeling overlooked or dismissed often struggle with self-esteem, anxiety, and trust issues well into adulthood. They learn to suppress their emotions because expressing them has never led to support, only criticism or indifference, and that was my reality. When I spoke, my words felt like background noise. If I expressed excitement about something, it was brushed aside. If I was struggling, the response was always the same. You're overreacting. Toughen up. You're too sensitive. But here's what people don't realize. When you grow up constantly invalidated, you don't just stop speaking. You stop believing that your voice even matters. By the time I was in college, I had trained myself to expect nothing from my family. Holidays became obligations. Phone calls were rare, and when they did happen, they were filled with awkward small talk and long silences. It was easier that way. Easier to pretend that the distance didn't hurt. And then For the first time in my life, someone actually saw me. At a family gathering, my sister's fiancé, Alan, did something no one else ever had. He acknowledged me, not just as Jennifer's sister, but as my own person. He asked about my life, my interests, my goals, and for a moment, I wasn't invisible. It was nothing more than kindness. But to Jennifer, it was a threat. That night marked the beginning of everything falling apart. Because when you've spent your whole life being ignored, the last thing you expect is for your presence to become a problem. But that's exactly what happened. Jealousy isn't always loud. Sometimes it lurks beneath the surface, disguised as harmless comments, subtle glances, or unspoken resentment. But when it finally surfaces, it can be destructive. For Jennifer, it had always been about control. Control over how she was perceived, control over family dynamics, and most of all, control over the narrative. She was the perfect daughter, the admired sibling, the one who always had it all together. And as long as everyone played their assigned roles, everything remained intact. But the moment Alan treated me like an equal, that illusion cracked. To her, I wasn't supposed to be acknowledged. I wasn't supposed to be part of the conversation. The attention was meant to be hers. At first, her jealousy was subtle, passive-aggressive remarks, cold stares, and a noticeable shift in her behavior. She started clinging to Alan, as if proximity could erase whatever insecurities she had built in her mind. I barely noticed at the time, dismissing it as stress from wedding planning. Then, one night, she confronted me. And what she said changed everything. "I know what you're doing," she hissed, pulling me aside. "You've always been jealous of me, and now you're trying to take him too." I remember standing there, stunned, unable to process the absurdity of her words. Steal her fiancé? The accusation was so outrageous, so out of nowhere, that I actually laughed until I realized she was serious. No amount of reasoning would convince her otherwise. She had already made up her mind, twisting reality into a version that fit her fears. And that's when I understood. This was never about Alan liking me. It was about her fear of losing control. The more she fixated on this idea, the more irrational she became. And before I knew it, I was no longer just an inconvenience in her life. I was the enemy. But what she didn't expect was that Alan had been watching, and he saw everything. In the end, it wasn't me who destroyed my sister's wedding. She did it herself. Alan wasn't leaving her because of me. He was leaving because he saw the truth. A truth I had lived with my entire life. He saw the control, the manipulation, the way my family had erased me over the years, and he wanted no part of it. Jennifer thought she could rewrite reality, that she could turn me into the villain of her story. But lies have a way of unraveling, and when they do, they take everything down with them. For the first time, I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't beg to be understood. I simply walked away, and that, more than anything, is what destroyed her. Some battles aren't worth fighting. Some people will never see the damage they've done. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is let them face the consequences of their own choices. I spent years believing I had to prove my worth to my family, but the truth is, I was never the problem. And once I stopped trying to fix a broken system, I finally found something I had been missing my entire life. Peace. At the end of the day, some battles just aren't worth fighting. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is walk away and reclaim your peace. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more real-life stories like this. And hey, there's another video on the screen right now that I think you'll love. Go check it out.